according to, yes, just got started.
Yeah,
So we
Great.
should be-
So we will call the meeting to order as 2:02 on a snowy Monday afternoon. First order of business is, let's see, any additions or deletions to the agenda? Is anyone aware of an issue or anything that needs to be addressed on the agenda? Hearing none. Next up, we have the approval of our minutes from December 19th, 2025. Have people received copies of the minutes?
yes, and I move approval.
All right, a motion's been made to approve the minutes of December 19th. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Pete.
All right, moved by Bill, second by Pete. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And we have passed the first set of minutes. Second set is, I'll be looking for a motion to approve the minutes of January 12th, 2026.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, moved by Bill, seconded by Peter, with an honorable second by Justin. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay or raise a hand. We have passed our second round of minutes. All right, next up is the discussion and possible action items for rules under our contemplation. Right now I have Rule 27, Rule 11, and then what is not currently numbered as a rule, but this is the non-compliance, which is the audit item that we spoke about with some depth last meeting. Chris Perquette, I'll turn it over to you unless there's someone else who has a dying passion on which one to do, but whatever makes the most sense to take up first with the time we have.
Why don't we start with Rule 29, which is the agency non-compliance rule.
Rule
A
29. Yes, sir.
revised copy after discussion last week was sent out last week, but I can also put it up in the chat.
How about this? I'm going to share my screen and then you can talk through it and then I will navigate around. And does that work for you?
That works fine. So this is the rule that came out of the audit. This is compliance with council and enforcement of same. The major changes from the original proposal are in section A3. The language has changed to all statewide policies. Before it was, I don't recall what it was differently because I'm looking at my polished copy, but it was different. The other major change is down in section E2, which is on the second page. You'll see here we included information as to the date that the suspension becomes effective for the suspension of council services. I think those are the only two significant changes. I know that I think cleaned up a little bit of my grammar last time, and those changes would have made in, but they didn't change substantially any significant part of this. The only thing I don't believe that I added that we did discuss at our last meeting is there was a question as whether or not under the section we're looking at, which is 2, whether it should be spelled out who's being sent this letter, the suspension letter from the executive director. There was conversation about whether or not the executive director should be the first one making that decision. I think the answer we came back is yes, because it works better with the way our rules work, that then you can go into they have a right under Rule 9 to appeal that decision from the executive director. As well as it would be identical to if there were a Rule 20 violation, which is the training audit violation. If they weren't, if they lost services for that reason, or if they got in trouble for that reason, that's an executive director letter that goes out. So that we were mirroring that language. But that is the one thing that I did not include in this is who this letter is going to. I didn't know if that was something that people thought was necessary, and if so, we would include it here in subpart 2.
Well, thank you, Chris. Any questions or the comments for Chris?
I don't know if it's as much specific to Chris, but on that point, is there value in designating an alternate recipient? So where I'm thinking with this is if I'm the obstructionist and I'm the one who's not doing what needs to be done and you send me the letter, I already know that. Sorry, I just realized people had their hands up. I apologize. I didn't mean to jump ahead of everybody.
No.
We're taking
But
it out of your pay, Justin.
I appreciate that. So just
Problems will
After
come.
you started.
yeah. I'll just finish the thought real quick and make my apology that much more hollow. But if it's a chief of police and they're the obstruction or the person creating the obstruction, is there value in saying, to something like the town manager or something? I don't know. I'm just trying to think this through. If it's the head of the organization that's creating the obstruction and they're the recipient of the letter, should we have another method prescribed? So that's my thought.
My quick response, Justin, and Chris Burkell will go to you here just briefly in just a brief second, would be if we provide some thoughts to the executive director. I mean, this is basically saying they have to send a certified letter. There's going to be a notification process. So it should be received by a person. One of the things we talked about in our last meeting is like hey, we mentioned that to you in passing at the academy or something like that. So this is kind of formalizing the structure. But the second part is, what about agencies that don't have an agency head, which right now there's, I think, 2 that I'm aware of that they are absent their agency head. And then we can start talking about the wonkiness of the state and, well, who's in charge of the state police? The colonel, the commissioner, who's in charge of fish and wildlife, the colonel, the commissioner. Like it starts to get weird as we try to go across it. So I think if there's concern to the process the executive director runs, we would want to say, let's have a procedure that the executive director would have crafted that would say how we're going to actually execute. But let's leave it within the executive director's authority, because broadly the executive director should figure this out. And Chris, being the person holding that role, I would hope that you feel comfortable with that trust. But I don't know if you have other thoughts. I know you have your hand up though. So I just wanted to pitch in that response to Justin before we went to you. You have the floor.
Thanks. No, I appreciate that conversation and explanation because I could see where you're right. There are agencies that currently lack an agency head, one of which we're in contact with the town manager, and I can't recall who the other one we're in contact with, but yeah, I think agency does cover it. As long as I've made notification to an agency and then I identify who that person was that received that notification, it's kind of on them, the way I look at it from that point. But the one thing I just wanted to ask a quick question on is on number 3 on page 2 there, that the executive director shall inform the VCJC of any suspension of services. At what point does that kick in? Because I may send notification to an agency, and should that notification then go to the council as well? And if so, does that go to the chair? Do I just notify the council at their next meeting? There might be things that, play out and get resolved before there's even been a notification. So I just don't want to be held to something that says I should be notifying the council when I may not have done that prior to some other resolution.
Any thoughts for Chris? Peter?
Yeah, I think I think that the director should have some leeway and that they have to be informed once service is suspended, and he can tell them why. But if it's still being worked out, I mean, I don't know, a formal notification needs to be done in that process, because there could be a number of reasons why there's an issue, right? It could be because there is the command staff all got fired, right? And and then they're scrambling. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons for it, and having your service suspended is a pretty big deal. So I would reserve that notification for a really big deal. It's just my thoughts.
Bill?
Yeah, well, the follow up on that thought, and then I have another observation about the policy. I think I would agree that this is in terms of point 3 there on the executive director informing the council. I think that doesn't trigger until they've actually been suspended. Not we're thinking about it or it's in process or but when it's actually taken place. And I think it's open enough in form. I mean, I think quite honestly, Chris in his update to the council, a regular council meeting could be taken to inform the council about that. So I think just knowing about it in without any great detail about what that should look like, it would be on record as having been informed in that way without getting into a lot more process. That's the observation on that. And I just had one point. I don't know what we're going to do, but as I read subsection C or section C of this, so it's up a little further, um, where the agency's policy shall be available for review by a representative of the council staff upon reasonable notice. I don't know whether we wanted to be more precise there and have a time frame. Whether, but not to exceed some period of time following a written request for the review. I don't know. I don't know how this actually plays out and if it's too much trouble, but that seems to beg, well, what's considered reasonable notice? That's over.
I have thoughts, but I see Lindsay's hand and she will probably have valuable thoughts. Lindsay?
Thanks, Mark. I was just going to say, not even directly related to that, but just if there's a way to define council services. I know it's statutory language, but what exactly does that mean? And if we're going to be enforcing that and notifying an agency of that, what does that actually mean?
Very good point.
Do we want to define council services and rule?
No.
How quickly can we set up services versus tear down services? What services are we obligated to provide? Like, does it start opening doors to other things that we might not be thinking about, but as we think about this one direct issue of cutting someone off? And just my reflection on Bill's thoughts, kind of in the same vein of the discussion on, well, who are we serving? Well, we'll serve the agency head, and generally that would probably hold true, but are there times we're not serving the agency head? Maybe, and then why? To the same degree, like saying we want to trust the executive director to do things. Maybe it's procedures that drive some of these things that are left to a council decision at some point for someone else to exercise. And so Chris isn't left hanging on with, hey, well, you notified the number 2, why didn't you notify the agency head? And this is just legal procedural gymnastics versus, well, what's reasonable notice? And that's not necessarily defined, but I mean, I'm sure we can come up with a few different reasonableness standards from the civil or criminal systems, which we could probably point to as a broad practice. And then if we're talking about informing the VCJC, like, well, does Chris notify the chair? Does he notify the council himself? Like, what's that duty look like? I mean, I would assume when the council has said, here's the line, you've crossed over the line and no more, you're cut off from whatever you're cut off from. That's what needs to be notified. Is it cause for an emergency meeting? In my opinion, no. But at the end of the day, I think that there's a duty of the rules to deliver the clarity to the person having to exercise the rule. Chris shouldn't have to be held accountable to something we're not clear on, but I also don't know that any of these need to be captured in rule directly. That would then require the change at $2,000 and the APA process when we recognize, well, we didn't think about agency heads who aren't employed right now. We didn't think about agency heads who are currently suspended and the town manager has asserted their authority. We didn't think about the sheriff who is currently incarcerated and the high bailiff is acting in the capacity of the high bailiff as required by statute. Vermont law gets weird quick. So I think we should find a way to, and this is probably true to all of our rules, if we don't already have it, say, we will establish procedures that will operationalize these rules, but the goal is to say we're cutting them off from the services. The services are offered in Appendix A. And we update Appendix A by council vote, not by rule change. Peter.
So I don't have any great thoughts about reasonable because it depends on what the request is. What's being requested. Reasonable might be a couple days or it might be a couple of weeks. And I think we have to allow for some judgment both from the director as well as the council. If the department didn't feel it was reasonable, they could certainly bring that argument to the council, I believe, and then they would determine whether the director was being reasonable in their request. As far as services go, I don't know about the other rules, but in Rule 29, it does describe some of the services provided. And services are going to change, right, with the time is based on what training, but certainly it's, having access to the academy and academy training. I think that's a big piece.
Would it be safe to say, in reflection to policy C, that these are submitted to the council with our annual training updates that I have to do like each March, no later than each March? Lindsay said B.
Sorry. It doesn't explicitly say annual training, but it does say said affidavit will be submitted prior to March 1st of every year, which is the deadline for the annual training.
Is the intent of C to say we want to be responsive to an agency who has done something dumb and we want to now provide direct attention to them versus the 70+ agency submission, which it sounds like we already have a procedure in place to address?
I think C was designed to mirror what we have in Rule 20 that allows VPA staff to go out and do an on-site audit to ensure that an agency's policies are mirroring our model policies and that they're that they have the sign off and that they're adhering to them. So it was that was my intent when I wrote it, was to kind of mirror what we already had.
So I posed the follow-up question then, Chris. Would it make sense that we have, similar to the concept around waivers, we had for years, we had training waivers and we always used training waivers, but we started running into situations where we said, well, what about this? And rather than try to solve it in just about every single rule, and Kim, you might be able to provide historical context to this because that's the best I got. Rather than try to define in every rule, we came up with saying, how about we just have a waiver rule that addresses waivers of anything? And so could we have an audit rule? Could we have this is how the council will handle this auditing function? And that would be yet another thing to consider, but maybe we defer to a made up Rule 30 that doesn't exist right now to say agencies have a duty to respond in accordance with Rule 30 for evaluating this, and failure to do so could be subject to Rule 29. Peter?
So I'm actually going to advocate for just leaving it. I think that, somebody, a department may be in the middle of a mess, and, the academy asks for copies, but understands the circumstances that are being going through. So reasonable could be 3 weeks, where on another, if there isn't a whole lot going on, reasonable can be a week. I think we have to give them the flexibility.
I'm
Just
good.
following. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I'm good with that. I mean, I understand that flexibility. I guess maybe my comments were thinking about active obstructionists. Folks, the department that, doesn't want to play. Whether it be an FIP rule or there's some other rule is yet to be, constructed. So, but I understand the reasonableness is a variable concept.
All right, so I see somebody just posted something in the chat. Chris Perkett.
So Director Bakel just reminded us that in Rule 8 of the council rules as they exist right now is the ability to waive any requirement or any rule. So there is that, although he's been very clear that that is a last resort and that he doesn't want people to think about it as a first resort. But also I was looking in Rule 20, which is why, and I see in Rule 20 subsection E is that agencies' training records will be available for review by a representative of the council, staff, on reasonable notice. So that's where this subsection C came from, is that I cut and pasted the language so that we have the same authority for them under reasonableness.
Yeah, the only thing that I could care less whether this stays or goes. Like I don't have any. There's no hill for me to live on or die on here. I'm just wondering, as we start talking about this, do we start coming across the same conversation elsewhere that might necessitate just saying, let's have a standalone rule that runs the function. To that end, just for the sake of keeping us on track, does anybody have an opinion strongly felt about Section C based on the conversation?
I'd say leave it as it is.
Okay. Chris Burkett, have you been persuaded in any way with any nuggets of brilliant thought?
I've been persuaded by many nuggets of brilliant thought, but not on this particular thing.
Great. So we're gonna leave that one alone, and we're gonna come back down to was it 3 or 2B?
It's
3.
It is 3, because we were wondering when there was a question as to when the executive director would inform VCJC of suspension of services. And I think what Director Clements said makes sense. By leaving it as it is right now, we provide maximum flexibility to the executive director. If he feels he has to alert the council immediately, he can blast out an email to all council members so that they're instantly aware. If not, we have monthly business meetings, and it can be part of his update. And the only time that Rule 29 is going to be effective and create a suspension is after the agency has already been told, hey, you're out of compliance. Let's get you back in compliance. Here's why you're out of compliance. Here are some steps you can take to get back in compliance. And here's a deadline by which we want you to do that, as well as the executive director has the ability to enter into to waive the suspension of services for a set period of time. So even if they miss that deadline, they can negotiate with the director and say, hey, look, we need an extra month, or we need an extra 2 months. And he can, under subsection F, enter into such a written agreement, not to exceed 6 months. So, I mean, it's the idea that they can coast for a little bit, but they can't coast forever. So I think my suggestion would be leave it as is. so as to allow maximum flexibility for the executive director.
Does anyone have any thoughts strongly for, against, or in a different direction of section 3?
I'd only ask executive director, with the advice of your counsel, are you comfortable with having that level of discretion, or do you want us to set more of a practice of when you need to inform the council?
No, I'm actually fine with that. It was just the way I like, I haven't been part of these conversations beforehand other than today reading it. And then it said, I shall inform them. So I was like, when does that take place? And in what fashion do I have to inform them? And what about where I'm working with an agency? So having heard this conversation, no, I'm fine with that being the way it is.
Okay.
As long as the subcommittee is fine with, should it be another executive director? Are you comfortable with that language being in there?
Yeah, I think the nice part about it being broad or in rule is that if in the future the council had some issue with this, the council could direct the executive director to, inform us by email or, I don't think the council's beholden to the executive director having like absolute discretion in this area. The way it's written, like, I think the council could direct the executive director.
Yeah.
If it wanted a sort of more timely or in a certain time frame.
The only other concern I think I would have personally is if there could ever be an assessment that, well, you didn't do that for agency X and now you're treating us differently, which I would want the executive director to have to protect the protection when good faith discretion is used. So I could see where codifying it's helpful, but the flip side of that being when bad faith discretion is used, then what problems do we have to deal with? So like, I'd rather have a competent, capable director, which we have right now, who's able to operate within the boundaries and do the things. And then I think this is where I come back to the same statement I said before, which is maybe the director just has procedures, whether the director writes those procedures and says, I recommend these, and that's how we're going to do it from here on out. Or if it's done a different way, I don't know. But not trying to add one more thing to your plate, Chris, but I like you having the discretion. And
well, procedures are great or not. I love when things are laid out so that you know what the pathway is. But then when you don't have a procedure, as we're learning in some things as we go forward, that we really need to have procedures, especially when it comes to, like, for instance, our hearings. And we all know that we follow the APA is when hearings go, but what are the procedures when other factors come into play that we haven't had yet? So I don't have any issue with having additional procedures. It's just, that finding the time to make that happen.
right. And I don't want to submit that I'm asking you to write any procedures for anything, but I think that is a path forward. If you had a concern and said, I don't know that I feel comfortable with this, that might be the thing of we author it in procedure. All right. Sounds like we have found a place of consensus on 3. Is there anything to be said about draft Rule 29 in its entirety? Does anybody want to have more time to think about this and we vote on it next meeting, or to make a motion to adopt it now?
I'll make a motion to adopt Rule 29 as presented.
Mhm.
Is there a second?
In the absence of, and my disdain for vacuums, I'll second that motion.
All right, moved by Justin, seconded by Bill. Before I push any further, Chris Perkett, I just want to verify you don't have anything that we need to change from the presented document.
That's correct.
Great. Is there any further discussion on draft Rule 29? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay or raise a hand. The ayes have it, and we have approved Rule 29 in draft form. All right, rule 11 or 27, Chris Burkett?
Dealer's choice, sir.
Let's do default judgments for, actually, that's probably a large conversation, isn't it?
Might be a little bit longer than some of the others. Let
Is
me
rule
bring up,
11 easier?
Let's take a look at that.
We have
That didn't-
28 minutes.
We did talk about Rule 11 quite a lot last time, which is establish a fee schedule for those who are not looking along. But let's talk about it because I think we can get there. So hopefully, I remember doing this. I think providing the new language that was provided to me that I happen to really, really like because it simplifies things a lot. And I'll
I'm
share my
working on
screen.
trying to find a rule 11, Chris.
So this is Rule 11, establish a fee schedule. What it essentially does is it creates a new section D, eliminates section E entirely, and just kind of puts the two together and turns it into this. For fees within the council's authority to establish, they shall adopt a schedule of fees approved by majority vote of the council that shall become effective 90 days after approved by the council. And this is after we already talked about no later than a regular schedule, establishing a base tuition rate, which won't apply to basic training. The executive director will report in writing. So those things don't change. Those have always been in the rule. But what it does do is it eliminates the requirement to change our fees by rule. Instead, we can do it by basically by majority vote. And therefore avoid having to go through LCAR every time that we need to change our schedule of fees. And it makes it very clear that this is only for those fees that's within our authority to establish. So if there are fees that are required by statute, I think that this circumvents that nicely.
Awesome. I think that captured everything we talked about in our last meeting.
Yep.
Is there any questions, thoughts, or concerns for Chris Burkett or draft rule 11?
Yes, my mind isn't focused yet today. Isn't the $30 entrance exam fee set by statute?
It is, sir.
So there would have to be statutory language change to eliminate that, correct?
Well, we're not changing it in the rule at all. What we're saying is that any fees that are within our authority to establish, we can change by vote. But yes, if we wanted to change that fee, that's when we'd have to go through the legislature to do.
And so if the legislature changed the fee this year, just making it up, we wouldn't have to change our rules next year because they changed the fee. Right now, in our current rule 11, we would have to change the rules if the legislature changed the fee.
That's correct. Because right now we specifically say it's a $30 entrance exam fee by rule, rather than just that we will charge an entrance exam fee at a rate that we'll determine, which we can't because legislature determines it.
Any concerns, Chris Burkell?
Just that we're paying the difference between that $30 fee and every entrance exam that comes in through our online testing or in-person testing. So yeah, I would like to get that removed from statute as soon as possible, even if it's just that one.
Just to keep us on track for the rule decision or discussion, this seems like a way forward. Chris, I don't have an issue with the legislative lobbying thing. I just don't know that we're the committee to do that or not to do that. So I will throw that football to the council chair on how he wants to proceed with that, with the executive director of the academy or the council, and Dip. Any other thought on Rule 11?
Well, I'm in agreement that that fee shouldn't be in statute. So anything we can do to get that statute changed to make it more permissible for the council to set all the fees, then that would be great. So we're talking about the one, so.
Right.
I don't know how, well, it's a whole other conversation about whether, with the current legislative challenges in front of them, where this would be on their priority list, but.
It almost seems insignificant enough that it could be part of a miscellaneous judicial or fee bill. Not that there's really fee bills, but it's a simple problem as opposed to a policy issue. And I think there is a way forward, and I'm happy to talk to others about it. But I'm not hearing a lot of further feedback for Rule 11. I'll just do this as the last call before I ask for a motion on it. Hearing none, is there a motion to adopt Rule 11 as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Moved by Peter, is there a second?
It got too painful to sit on my hands.
I will acknowledge that as a second from Bill Clements. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And we have passed Rule 11. So Rule 27. That one up.
So this is one that we've made some significant changes in. I'm trying to remember how much of it we discussed at our last meeting, but this was based on a desire to create more efficiency with our contested hearings, so that when an officer is given adequate notice of a hearing date and time and fails to appear, essentially we can get a default judgment. And it's the language I suggest here in section B is not necessarily a straight up default judgment. It's essentially creates a rebuttable presumption that the allegations are true, and it allows for an immediate vote based on that, which is as close as makes no odds, but it also provides for it to be a rebuttable presumption. The bottom line is that whoever is in my job as the Act 56 still prosecutor can't just walk in and assume because there's nobody there that they don't have to do their job. They still have to show a prima facie case, essentially. They may not have to put it on. It could be that it's done through the notice of hearing, so long as that's specifically, if that's specific enough to provide the council with enough evidence to go forward. But I think that balances between spending an entire morning listening to something where there's nobody on the other side and then voting on it, versus the guy doesn't show up, so he's just automatically, zotted. It basically it provides that there's still some checks and balances. And then the category C, and what is unfortunately on my copy also C, but is former subsection D, is deleted. Subsection C talks about what we do with first offense. Category B, conduct. This language is just mirroring what is now in statute. So we've cleared it up that now there can be a sanction for category B, first offense conduct, but no greater sanction than the disciplinary action taken by the law enforcement officer. For example, if an officer were to violate something that would be considered category B, like a violation of body-worn camera policy, I'm going to throw that out there as a hypothetical. They didn't turn on their body-worn camera. The agency does an investigation, determines they failed to do that, takes the disciplinary action of putting a written warning in their file. That's as far as our sanction can go. But it would still be a public determination of unprofessional conduct category B, so that these no longer would be confidential, and we would still be allowed to sanction up to that point. Don't ask me what happens if they do nothing, because I don't know.
All right. Questions, comments, or thoughts?
Yeah, point
Justin
of
said-
clarification. Oops, I didn't raise my hand. Go ahead, Justin.
No,
I'll
Bill,
raise mine.
it's only fair. You go, because I did it to you earlier, so have at it.
Okay, all right. Just a point of clarification on section C. In that first sentence, if the council determines after hearing the offense has been committed, the committee shall impose. Is it the committee or is the council?
You took what I was going to say too, Bill, so I'm glad I didn't have to
Determine
say
that
anything.
sanction.
You're right. I do need to clear that up. My feeling is that it would be the council and the council as done through their
Okay.
professional regulation committee. And at some point we need to talk about, and I didn't ask to amend and add this to our agenda, so I guess it'll have to be next time, but we do need to decide, is the PRS or the PRC? Are they a subcommittee or a committee? Because Rule 26 has them as both.
So, Chris, we can take care of that in our follow-on section if we get to it, but I also don't think it's substantive.
No.
The council has subcommittees. We don't have committees. But I think statute created the public or professional regulation, whatever it is. So I'm not sure if statute supersedes the council's naming, and why it was named that way was really just a machination of Bill Sheets when he was the acting or interim executive director. Chris Burkell.
Yes, it's always been the subcommittee. I think that was as determined by Bill Sheets at the time. I have two questions, and maybe I'm not thinking this through. So the intent of this discussion was to get to a default hearing so that you're not wasting the time. Is that the original purpose?
Yes.
So this would be, my assumption, the process for either a category B1 or a B2. Would that be accurate?
So, Chief, this Rule 27 subsection B in red there would apply to any contested hearing that stems from unprofessional conduct. So it's essentially, I mean, it would apply to a person whether they committed A, B, or C conduct. The subsection C deals directly with first offense category B conduct, because we are by statute limited in what sanctions we are allowed to bring against an officer that we deem to have committed that category type of conduct. In I want to say it's 2407, but I can double check if people need me to be. I mean, in the old statute, we weren't allowed to bring any sanction whatsoever unless the first offense conduct was one of the, enumerated types of first offense B conduct. Otherwise, we couldn't bring any sanction at all. Now we can bring a sanction, but our sanction is limited to the disciplinary action taken by the agency, and can't surpass that unless we find one of the following, which is what goes on I through IV there, which is, again, that's pulled directly from the statute. Basically, if there's a reason why there wasn't either there wasn't disciplined by the agency because they fired or resigned the guy resigned, it's done by the executive, so he can't discipline himself. Or if we believe they didn't conduct a valid investigation, or we think that the disciplinary action is clearly unreasonable, we can surpass their actions and come up with a sanction that works for first offense category B conduct. But we have to overcome, there's a threshold, there's essentially a rebuttable presumption that what they did is where we should stop.
So I guess my question would be, should there be a section in this rule that also incorporates the fact that if this is a default judgment and the council in that default, based on the circumstances, decides to decertify, that there is still the availability of the appeal to the Supreme Court? Does that need to be in the rule or no?
I don't think it needs to be in the rule because by statute, a determination like that is considered a final judgment under the APA, which would allow them the appeal rights. I can look up the statute. Give me just a second. Because I actually had to look this up in the recent past.
While you look that up, Chris, I would assume that we are laying out the administrative appeal rights that a person could follow, and once those are exhausted, then the judicial system is availed. So I would assume that that would just be a normal course without the statutory reference. Is that a correct assessment?
There's nothing in this rule that lays out specifically or explicitly what the next steps are, but if in Title 3, Section 815, which is the part of the Administrative Procedure Law that talks about judicial review of contested cases, it says that a person who has exhausted all administrative remedies available within the agency, who has agreed by a final decision of any contested case, can appeal that decision to the Supreme Court unless another court is expressly provided by law. So they would have that they would have a statutory right to appeal anyway. And we know that that's true because Grismore did it and the Supreme Court said, yep, that's the way it's supposed to go. So we have both, plain language statute as well as we have case law that provides guidance on that. I don't think that we need to put it into, I don't think that we need to put it into rule. That if people want it in rule, I'm happy to add it.
So the only follow-up I would have to that is, has there been any issue identified where we need to have a follow-on round of appeal that we do not currently have captured in our rules or practices?
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
Does anybody feel that we need to have an additional layer of appeal within the council's abilities? I assume not, but.
No, I think whether it's a default judgment or a judgment after a full hearing, it's still a final judgment, and then you would appeal
Right.
to the Supreme Court.
Right. I would agree. Yeah.
So with that, how do people feel about Rule 27?
Well, raise
Bill.
my hand. I don't know yet because what I'm finding is a chair of less than 2 years, and now having sat on 2 of the 3 hearings ever held under the process. I'm starting to get the feeling like every hearing something new comes out of it. We've had the 2, and had a brief discussion on theoretical level with Chris Burkett before we joined, and I'm struggling with what needs to be in procedure versus what needs to be in rule, because I think we have I'm feeling a lot of ambiguity as chair about process in some decision points, etc. So, but I don't necessarily, I can be very easily convinced that, and I guess my thinking about it right now is that we could probably resolve a fair number of things by procedure rather than rule, but there's still some ambiguity. So I don't know. I mean, if we move forward, I understand all of where we are now and some of the changes that were made and agree with them, but I could also see where we might have to come back again at some points. That's kind of where I am now. It's muddled. I feel like I'm swimming in a muddy pool.
I think that is enough of a statement around muddiness to say we don't need to move this today unless I'm not aware of something that Academy staff wants to whack me over the head with. But I mean, I'm completely fine with saying let's take time, think about that, and maybe we can come back at our next meeting and talk more in depth when we don't have 8 minutes left. And then we can make sure we get it right because it still costs $2,000 every time we need to come back and change this. So we can take time because we have it. Kim.
Mostly so I don't lose the thought. Bill, are you, with the process questions, are they process questions around a default judgment type hearing or just the hearings in general?
Oh, no, not so much around default judgment. I think those are much easier conditions to describe and define. It's a number of issues around the hearings and the pre-hearing process
Mm-hmm.
that has me struggling with things right now that I can't talk about because we have an active case. Um, and it's like a new wheel, right? Like how the hell do we do this,
Gotcha.
right? So that's where I am, and I think some of that can be cleared up by procedure and just getting some clarity. That may require rule. I'm not sure on roll, and it's not process and roll.
So would a possibility be, Bill, for you to talk with Chris Burkett between now and our next meeting to come up with something that could be publicly disclosed?
We can work on that, but there are some constraints as to what we can talk about
Right.
because these things, it's like flight rules, right? They're written in blood, right?
Yes.
You have to have an active case to understand where the problem is.
Well, just bringing us back to the default judgment piece, and I know we're going to run out of time and we're going to talk about it next time, but I think this is one area where, Mark, similar to what you brought up earlier, we'd want to be really careful that however we deem a default judgment case needs to be presented is done equally, no matter what agency or officers involved, so that it didn't seem like on one case, a notice of hearing's enough, and another case, multiple exhibits are submitted. So I think this needs a little more work to see like how detailed we'd want to be on what has to be presented to the council before that motion can be made to go forward.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
So I just wanted to throw out some of my thoughts on this rule just because it's quick. I don't think we need to dwell on them too much unless people want to, but we certainly will take it the time next meeting. One is just a consideration of how to undo a default motion. Let's say we have a default hearing today, all the reasons it makes sense. We throw the book at the person, and then a week later we find out the person had a heart attack on the way in. They were carted off to the hospital. All the things happen. We say, "Oh my God, we feel terrible," and now we want to undo it. So just a contemplation for how to undo it. Broadly, Chris Burkett said, Chris, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so feel free to and clean up anything I say, but Chris Burkett said, well, we have our waiver rule, which allows us to waive things, and so that would allow us to do that. And so there is that option available. But just a consideration. The second is a point of pedantry, which is that we're saying the officer. And so broadly, we could say, well, the law enforcement officer, or we could say the certified officer or whatever. I think there's just a value to consistency in the language we use, since officer is colloquial with police department professionals, whereas a deputy would be consistent with a sheriff's deputy, and a trooper would be consistent with the state police, and on and on and on. So how we reflect people by some form of title, just a discussion around if that's the correct term. Should we talk about respondent? Should we talk about law enforcement officer? Some other noun throughout our rules, but also in this rule. And then the third one is no longer a point because it's not even in this draft. So just wanted to throw those out on the table in case anybody had thoughts. But we'll save all of those thoughts for our next meeting, since we are just about at time. So real quick, on the rules discussion where we're not taking any action, Chris, you brought up the professional regulation committee versus subcommittee. Do you feel that that's clear, or is there anyone with a feeling, a desire to change reflection of committees or subcommittees? And if nobody wants to commit to a direction there, because I wasn't planning on presenting this, we can always
so
come
much
back to that
committing.
too, but if
Yeah,
it's
not
low
so
hanging
much
fruit,
committing.
let's whack it.
Yeah, I'm not so much committing to a direction, but and don't want to engage in any discussion, deep discussion. But Chris Perkel and I have talked about and looked at committees and structures, and I was a little perplexed because it's not the Criminal Justice Committee with the subcommittees; it's the Criminal Justice Council with committees. I mean, that's how I view it. Is an outsider coming in, unless there's things in statute that require things to be called subcommittees. But I'll just leave it at that. That has perplexed me from day one.
Chris Percat.
So I wasn't around, but secondhand, my understanding as to the history behind this is that there was under the council two sort of committees. One was the training and education part of the committee, and the other was sort of the administrative parts of the council. And that the professional regulations subcommittee was parked under that second committee. But in a restructure that was done after Bill Sheets at a time that I am unaware of, because again, I wasn't around, um, those two committees sort of dissolved and became their own things. And then as a result, the professional regulations subcommittee sort of just became a free floating subcommittee doing its thing. Hopefully the email that I sent explaining my thoughts regarding committee subcommittee made sense. If not, I'm happy to discuss it, but not in 35 seconds. So
Yeah, we're good.
again,
I'm not losing
it's
sleep over it.
yeah, it's one of those pedantic things that annoys me as a lawyer, but it should annoy no one else because it's just me being persnickety about words.
That's funny because I've probably been persnickety on the same words over the last 5 years with some of the people who are in this meeting who are probably laughing at me too. So with the short time we have, is there any general comment or public comment that anyone would like to make before our next meeting?
To make a general comment,
Yes, sir.
this is an update to discussion that we had at our last meeting, because since our last meeting, we had a hearing. And I did in the interim have conversations with Wesley about to reflect our desire to have a written judgment be more detailed. And so that's a direction we're moving in. And I expect, it'll take a few weeks to get that done rather than a few days. So um, we'll see. It's coming. We're going to attempt to have it be a little more explanatory than the prior one in December.
Awesome.
In an attempt to cut off a rule that says that outlines the detail of what needs to be in a judgment. Which actually, by the way, there is information in the APA about what a judgment should contain that I don't believe we're following. So.
All right. Anyone else? Just real quick, while I build an agenda for our next meeting, I have our language choices as one of our discussion items around committees, subcommittees. So we'll have that at a future meeting. We've taken care of Rule 29 and Rule 11. We'll keep Rule 27 up on the drawing board. Are there any rules that people have a dying opinion for us to take up immediately?
Not dying, but I know the PT stuff was something that we've been, Sheriff Mark True had wanted talked about, so.
Yeah, not an exhaustive list, but I currently have PT Rule 14, which is rule waivers versus training waivers and out of jurisdiction programs. Rule 20 and contested hearings. Those are all other topics. If nobody has a dying interest, I'll just work with Chris Burkett to build the list of what's next. But if there's something you want to prioritize that you're aware of, we can take a look.
Sheriff,
I
can
guess
you
I'll just
throw on, sorry, can you throw on the agenda, Lindsay had made an ask for a minor change to Rule 20 subsection B, just to add the words or designee when we're talking about the agency head submitting reports. I think that can be hopefully a quick change that we can talk about quickly, although, best laid plans and all that.
Yeah, I didn't think subcommittee was
I'm never brief, so.
I didn't think subcommittee was going to throw anyone's day, and that was more of a conversation. So, yep, I will put that on there. Any other topic areas?
I just want to make sure I understood that we are not abandoning the opportunity for a default judgment, but just revisiting it in the next meeting. Was that the plan?
My sense is yes, we're not abandoning default judgments, so we'll answer that one specifically. However, based on the chair's reflections and maybe some other thoughts that we're just not able to put into a public meeting right now, this might be more complicated than meets the eye. Is that safe to say, Bill? And so there might be an opportunity for us to at least consider opportunities to make this rule better. If we're able to do it right now, it sounds like we're trying to follow a map without a flashlight, or compass, or GPS. I don't know. Anyways, hey Ken, welcome. Any further comments, questions, or issues? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Justin.
I'll second.
Second by Peter. All in favor? We're doing it by acclaim, whatever. Take care. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week.
Take care.
Thank you, bye.
All right.
Chris
Bye-bye.
Burkett, do you have a minute?
Bye.
See you,
I
Ken.
do. Let me turn off the recorder and try and turn off the recorder.
I just want to talk about agenda if you had a minute right